and then I'm hoping we can just jump into a nice kind of question conversation between all of us. So it doesn't have to be like comments. You can jump in, be in dialogue with each other, and yeah. Okay, so all the way to the left, we have Ray Atchison, the director of Reaching Critical Will, which is the disarmament program of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, or WILP. WILP is the oldest women's peace organization in the world, founded in 1915 by women protesting World War I. Ray leads WILP's work stigmatizing war and violence. She brings a feminist approach to work prohibiting weapons and challenging the arms trade. She also represents WILP in activist coalitions like the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, which is the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize winner, and as well as the campaign to stop killer robots in Korea Peace Now. So if everyone could welcome Ray. Next to Ray, we have Ayoung Choi. Ayoung was born in Korea during World War II. She grew up in Shanghai, Taiwan, and Japan, and she came to the US for college in Illinois, where she majored in art and subsequently made New York City her home. Originally a painter and sculptor, her interests expanded to other fields that included entrepreneurship, teaching, publishing, and working in human resources and public relations. With management skills gained from years of experience, she became a consultant to nonprofit organizations after her retirement. In 2015, she traveled across the demilitarized zone from North Korea to South Korea with a group of international women activists calling for an end to the Korean War. She currently serves as chair of Women Cross DMZ, a global movement continuing to work for peace and reconciliation on the Korean Peninsula. So, yay, welcome, Ayoung. And right next to me is Nuan Susan Sebit. She is a seasoned and talented young lawyer and advocate, passionate about the rule of law and access to justice for women, girls, and children's rights. She's a human rights lawyer who believes in equality for all before the court of law. Ms. Susan holds a Bachelor of Law from the University of Juba in South Sudan and has had several years of training in the field of human rights. She recently joined the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, GNWP, as the third recipient of the Cora Weiss Fellowship for Young Women Peace Builders. Through this fellowship, Nuan joined GNWP's international coordinating team for 1 year, where they work to promote effective implementation of the UN Security Council resolutions 1325 and 2250, which I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about, and supporting resolutions on women, peace, and security. She supports the youth, peace, and security agenda at national and local levels. So, welcome, Nuan.
Thank
you. All right, let's jump in. I'm thinking we start with the basics. How did each of you get involved in your current work?
So first, thanks very much, Emily, and thanks Sally as well, and to Peace Action for organizing this great meeting for all of us, and it's wonderful to be in conversation also with my fellow panelists. So how I got started with the oldest women's peace organization in the world. I was actually in my early 20s and fresh out of university. Previous to that, I had done an internship with a woman named Randy Forsberg, who some of you may recall was one of the leaders of the nuclear freeze movement back in the 1980s, before I was even born. So I worked with her when I was still in university, and when I graduated, I knew that I wanted to do something about nuclear weapons and about weapons and war in general. So I looked for a place that I could call home. I wanted something feminist, I wanted something intersectional, and really found a home in WILP. It's a big organization. It has offices here in New York and also in Geneva. We have staff in South Africa, Bosnia, London. We have national sections in about 40 countries around the world. So it's a very global organization. And we do lots of different types of work. So I lead the program on disarmament, and I focus a lot of my work at the international level at the UN, which is why I'm based here in New York. But we also work closely with partners around the world on human rights issues, women's rights issues, emerging conflicts in the MENA region and elsewhere. And so it's a really dynamic local to global and back again atmosphere to work in. And it's just been a great place over the last 13 and a half years, I think we decided is how long I've been there, to grow as an activist and to be involved in different coalitions and to really put the practices of feminist organizing to work in all of my daily activities.
Well, my start goes back very long ways, but in actuality, I was a very slow comer to the activist world. As Emily said, I started my after college. I was an artist. I came to New York. I was just all into that. And at that time in New York, there were very few Koreans. I am Korean American. And I just didn't really know what the rest of the world was. I just knew my art. And then I had a family and all of that. It wasn't until, I would say, in the 90s that I began to become a little bit more aware of the world around me. And I started basically having doing advocacy work for the Korean community that was growing here in New York, small businesses that were beginning to have problems with the city and state agencies, violations of sanitation laws and all of that. So that was my foray into just caring about the society around me, and I really started a very active movement to register Korean American voters. And from that moment on, I became very, very concerned with what was happening to the general immigrant communities, and so voter registration was a highlight. Then it turned out to be a larger picture for me, and I began to focus on violence against women that was happening not only around the world, but specifically in the Asian communities. So starting with that as my most passionate social issue, then equal rights became another layer of my concerns. I am today working most energetically with an organization called Women Cross DMZ, and back there is my roommate from Pyongyang, North Korea, because in 2015 Jean and I were part of Jean is here from LA visiting. We were a part of 30 international women activists who made the journey from wherever we were in the world, met in Beijing, got our papers together, and then flew into Pyongyang. And that was an amazing experience. I could just go on for a long time, but we met with North Korean women for 4 days, 4 nights, a lot of meetings, a lot of getting to know each other, and it was person to person, woman to woman mostly. 30 international women from around the world came to Pyongyang to talk about, let's figure out a way to get peace into our land. And there are a lot of tearful moments, a lot of joyous moments, and the bonding that took place is just irreplaceable. It's hard to describe. And I brought this, I am wearing, this is a scarf that 30 of us wore. We all underneath wore white dresses or blouses and pants, and then we had the scarf, and each of us wore it the way we liked, slung this way or just tied across. And the pattern here is a very traditional Korean theme. It's called jogakbo, and it's a patchwork quilt. It's a fancy version of that, and different products and cultural things, and these are other manifestations. These are coasters, and this is a purse. So when you see something like this, whenever I see this, it just always moves me. Of course, other cultures have their own version of this. I bring this up because one of my fondest memories in those 4 days in Pyongyang was the moment when we came together at this huge arena. It's a very official symposium, like with microphones and everyone seated formally. And at one point, when the speeches were all done, we came to the center of the floor, and we had brought a large white quilt with a patchwork that had been made by the women in the New York area. And actually, some of the women who helped us make our piece were survivors of the Holocaust. So it's a very great energy that went into our piece. Then when we brought it into the room, the North Korean women had done their part. So we put the two together, and then we did the stitching ceremony, bringing the two parts that had already so many pieces in each, and made one quilt. And then we spontaneously broke into song, and we were waving this and tearing and singing the peace song. So that type of activism, to me, was kind of new. And I'm not like Ray. I didn't think that I would be doing this sort of thing and finding so much meaning in it at this stage of my life. But then, of course, I'm thinking, I don't have like 100 years left. And whatever I do have, as you heard from Emily, I was born in 1940, so you can do the math. Hi, Linda. And hi. So my journey in this anti-war and peace movement, my commitment, is deeply personal. First, I am Korean, and our focus on the DMZ is not only about Korea, which is important to me, but it is to try to bring peace there so that we can extend the peace around the region and to prevent war, prevent any further military buildup, because it's taking precious resources from the welfare of our people into billions of dollars for arms. So that's my journey here.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, my colleague in the panels. And my name is Nguyen Susan Sebit. I have very long names, and I prefer people not to be struggling, call me Nguyen or Susie. So I'm a South Sudanese. I came to New York last year, October, as a Cora-wise Peace Building Fellow. And I'm with the Global Network of Women Peace Builders. Global Network of Women Peace Builders is a coalition of international organizations around the world, especially conflict-affected countries. So they have honored Cora-wise by creating a position for fellowships to bring young women from conflict-affected countries to have experience in New York, meet great people like you, engage with the policymakers at the global level, and I'm one of the luckiest young women from South Sudan. It was a very competitive positions, and there were 36 countries. There were applicants from 36 countries. So I asked my supervisor when I arrived in New York, did you have a consideration of me because I came from South Sudan? But she said, no, it was based on merit. So Emily, thank you so much. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, my country, my experience, why I'm here, and why I have been so privileged to be a Cora-wise Peace Building Fellow. I was born in South Sudan. That was a Sudan before it became South Sudan. And all of you are aware of the history of Sudan. We had been in war since 50s and since independence from the colonial periods. There was a country that has been mixed between the Arab descent and then the African where I came from. So my country have never been in peace, from my grandfather to my father until we were born. So I happen to be one of the, thank you. I happen to be one of the children born during the war of independence, of the South Sudan independence. That started in 1983 before I was born. So I was born in the camp. I grew up with my family in the camp. My dad was a guerrilla man. He was fighting the Sudan government with the SPLA. So I grew up seeing a lot of atrocities. I experienced a lot of bad things. I experienced aerial artillery. I experienced also ground artillery. So I happen to be very lucky because I went to school through the humanitarian assistance. And one of the organizations that supported me and other children in my camp was a French organization called JRS. It's a Catholic kind of organization. And they actually form, they sign an agreement, they call it a cooperation agreement with Uganda, because I grew along the border of Sudan and Uganda. So they sign an agreement to use the Ugandan curriculum to teach us in the camp. And they hired teachers, good teachers, to teach us in the camp. Although we have on and off because of conflict, sometimes we move from camp to another camp. I said they call it a primary school, like going to secondary school. I don't know how you call it in America. So, and I did very well. And I was taken to Uganda by that organization with other children who were very, very bright. So we went to a refugee school in Uganda, and this is where I finished my high school. In 2006, I finished my high school and peace came to my country. So we were given 6 years of making unity attractive as one Sudan, or making separation as is two Sudans. So the government of Sudan decided like they need to pay the children of the Southerners who had been suffering, did not have good education. So they gave us opportunity to go back to school in Sudan. And I became one of the beneficiaries of a scholarship from the Sudan government. I went to one of the only university in Sudan that's teach English. That's the University of Juba. And that's why I know it's English. I need to give you that background because so many people ask me, why did you know good English? That's how I grew up. I thank the international community because they have impacted my life in so many ways. Education, I grew, I didn't have clothes, I didn't have shoes, I didn't have anything to eat. Not me alone, but the generation I came from. After the independence, we voted for independence in 2011. I voted, I was so lucky, I have my card, and it's in the history. Unfortunately, 2 years later, my country slid back to war, South Sudan. And the war that my country has subjected itself is not a war of liberation, it's not a war of independence, it's a personal war from the leaders, the elites. South Sudan being a rich country, it has a lot of resource, but my leaders did not see that. They look at themselves and they fought for them. However, conflict in the African context is totally different from other countries. Because in Africa, and South Sudan is not one of them, when disagreement happens between the leaders, communities become part of the conflict. And that's what happened in my country. So I came from one of the majority, but I'm from a minority within the majority. So my country slid into war, and the two communities who have their son fighting for the position became parties to the war. Women were raped based on ethnic line, children were killed, destruction happened, injustice happened. And I felt in 2000, I felt like after I graduated, actually I was working as an advocate because I was licensed by the South Sudan Bar Council, and I was doing both criminal laws and civil laws, and I was handling cases. But after the war, I saw atrocity that I saw when I was a little girl in the camp. Because when I was a kid, I could hear the stories of women being raped. But the context of our culture, children are not told things in detail, unlike in America culture in other countries in the West, where you grow up when your mother tells you something. They cover everything. But I could recall very well, one of the women was raped, but I could still tell up to now, but we were not told. So I agree that women are raped. I agree that knowing women are being raped, but there was no justice. So when the history repeats itself in 2011 until today, I felt it was my obligation as a young woman and being privileged. I thank God for that, because majority of my age mates did not survive during the war. They died of sickness, they died of war, they died of so many things. So that's how I took the activism as part of my life. And being a lawyer, I felt like justice, there should be no peace without justice, because impunity will continue to to carry on so long as the culprits are not brought to justice. And I'm here in New York, and I'm being very keen to know what other communities or other countries are experiencing, and also I felt like being here, I need to share experience from other countries, because my country is not the only country in a war. And it's, women from South Sudan are not the only women being affected by conflict. Another thing is, women are not given positions that are based key positions, decision-making position. We have the 1325, the UN resolution, that provide women opportunities to be protected and also to participate in peace building. Nobody is honoring that. So I felt also it is my obligation to advocate and lobby with the policymakers and the global global leaders to also join hands to ensure women of South Sudan have access to those positions. Because when women hold senior positions, decision-making positions, they will be able to influence the policies that protect children and women. So that's the little thing about me. I have a long story, but I will not go because it's the same. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for sharing a little bit more about yourselves and how you've come to this work. I think a clear theme is that being from a certain identity affects our work, right? Because women are affected by war in different ways, and it's important for us to be at the table and to be doing this work, and it is super personal. I guess there's clearly an international theme with everyone's work, but I think that you are all working in kind of different spheres in a way, all towards this larger idea of justice and things. What are some ways that you think that we could be working better together on our different issues and bringing them together and creating kind of a coalition of women doing great work in communities in the ground, but also at this global level?
Ray is with Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, a 100-year-old women's peace organization, extremely prominent, and we're so proud to and happy and privileged to have WILF and Women Cross the DMZ worked very, very closely together. We're just half of actually the larger coalition of 4 partners. The other 2, one of them is in Canada. It's the Nobel Women's Initiative. It was founded about, I can't remember, maybe 10 or so years ago by 6 women Nobel Peace Laureates, 2 of whom actually were part of our 30-member delegation who crossed in 2015 from North Korea to South Korea. Our purpose for crossing was to call attention to the fact that the war in Korea, which started technically in 1950 and ended technically in 1953, 3 years after 4 million people died, North and South and international partners who had come into the war. 4 million people, the peninsula was reduced to rubbish, to ashes. And sort of out of exhaustion, the parties said, let's just put our guns down and declare an armistice. So an armistice is not a peace treaty or a peace declaration. It just means that you stopped fighting. But that status has continued on till today. It's 67 years old. And it is a situation where we are still engaged in hostilities of all forms. We are in reality still at war. And North Korea and South Korea and the rest of the world, depending on which side they were siding with, have demonized the parties involved. So nobody really knows, what's the real situation. Because you talked about that person being evil and brutal and that person being weak and ineffective and all of this, and nobody is really able to arrive at a moment where we can, let's just say, peace is important. Let's just see if we can get to a peace agreement. Then maybe we can talk about denuclearization and how many things you give up and I will give up and we will do this, negotiate. But without an understanding that we are no longer enemies, how can we negotiate? So that's the thing that we, this coalition of 4 members, so I said Nobel Peace Laureate, Nobel Women's Initiative in Canada, my organization, Women Cross the DMZ, WILP, Ray's organization, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and then the South Korean Women's Movement, Peace Movement. And today we have a friend from that movement. Yu Young is back there. She just came to join us. She has a little cold, but she's here. So we have been dialoguing, meeting. It's very, very challenging because we're spread all over the world. No one is in one place. So when we have meetings, it's a virtual meeting, Zoom meeting. And when we do manage to, you know what Zoom is, right? It's like FaceTime, almost like. And we can do just so much over that, but then we do our best to also bring about face-to-face meetings where we can really dig into deeper discussions and agree and disagree and strategize. So we are right now engaged in this effort, and I didn't bring it with me, but we will be launching a campaign on March 14th in the morning. There will be a press conference, and it will be open to the public. If anyone wants to know more about this, please give me a call or get in touch with me. I don't want to take up that much time right now, but the peace treaty is our focus. We want a peace treaty now because we believe that when we can say, let's not be enemies anymore, let's be at peace, let's figure it out. Let's figure out the next steps after peace. That's just like, plain language for things that are more technically termed, but so Ray and her group has been incredibly engaged with us, and we're always talking. And as the world news changes, a lot of factors go into how certain people behave when they're at a summit, and we have to be not exactly victims, but we are influenced by what we can do from what is happening on the larger stage and what is not happening behind the stage, which very often is the way to do things quietly first, and then make larger declarations. But we are doing a lot of work right here in the United States because our focus is to change the minds of the U.S. Government's attitude towards North Korea and how peace can be achieved. So our goals are simply to educate or inform and then organize and continue to advocate. So I'm really very happy to see you here tonight because I don't know what else you might be doing, reading at home or watching TV or something, but just giving us a chance to tell you what are some of the more important issues that you maybe don't have a chance to get enough details on, the perspectives that we get in the mainstream media definitely don't tell you the full story.
I think the Global Network of Women Peace Builders that brought me to New York is a coalition of so many organizations around the world, Asia, Africa, MENA region, the Arab world, and then the Northern Africa. And they support the development of National Action Plan, and they work so closely with women organizations at the ground to ensure young women are taught with literacy because... Can you speak up a little bit? Oh, sorry. Yeah, because literacy is one of the most important things that young women become leaders in their own communities other than just sit down and wait for peace. They have to initiate local peace within their communities. Like I mentioned earlier that in the African context, and basically in my country, when conflict arises between the leaders, the communities become part of the conflict. And there is a need to develop and create that peace within the different communities. Because the leaders will sit down and they share their positions and they're okay. But the social fabric of the communities is broken and they continue to kill themselves. So women economic empowerment is very important, because when women are not economically empowered, they become very vulnerable to participate in peace building and also in peace process. When most of the peace agreements are being negotiated, they are not negotiated within the countries of conflict, they are negotiated outside. And women don't have access, they don't have resource to travel and follow, where the peace process is happening. So women economic empowerment is another thing which the GNWP is doing now with its partners organizations to empower women to do some economic activities and support their families, and Youth also is very important, targeting young women and young men to be part of the peace process. So the global impact of peace is also to initiate it from schools, curriculums, so children grow up when they can read and also they can talk about peace. So basically, among all these things I mentioned, there is also need to make sure that justice has to continue to prevail. Because if leaders are not held accountable, they will never cease conflict. And every leader that comes will continue to do the same thing. Also, these are great women organizations working on peace. Like, I've never had opportunity to know about these organizations because I did not have chance to meet them. So do other South Sudanese or other African young women working at the peace building also. So there is a need to develop an international, linkage, and we have to really work so close. I know we have issues of fundings and we have issues of financial support, but then I think the good thing is to have a solidarity of women organizations working for peace. So I think that one will support the peace process and the peace building too.
Just quickly on the Korea campaign, I totally agree. Very exciting to be working on this with so many different activists. And I find myself learning every day, and it's been a great example of the importance of coalitions and of cross-regional work as well, to have people from the US, Canada, Korea, Japan working so closely together on this joint project. And we've been lucky in WILP to have Yu Kyung in our office for the last couple months, and I find that every time we work on a document or have a meeting, I'm learning something new. And so I can contribute my knowledge of the UN system, but I don't have the expertise in the region. So by working together, that's how we actually make the progress. We don't all have the tools that we need, but that's why coalitions are so important. And so I just wanted to throw out a couple of other really neat examples of work that's going on right now. So WILP has been doing these interesting exchanges with women from Syria and Bosnia and Ukraine. So bringing women together from the context of Bosnia, where they did have a peace process, but women were not included in that. And it's falling to pieces now. And we're seeing also the neoliberal reconstruction of the country, how that's impacting women's lives now. And how nationalism is resurging in that context. So they're meeting with Syrian and Ukrainian women to talk about how to prevent this in a peace process that would happen in their countries in the future. And that kind of cross-regional learning, I think, is so imperative. And I think, well, hopefully as the Korea Project develops and as women are included, that's one of our demands, is that women be included in that peace process. And we've already been talking to, at the UN, the Irish delegation, and they've been talking about, maybe we could involve Northern Irish women in those conversations and have examples. So I think it's a great way to really do our activism, to make sure that we're getting all kinds of different experiences and perspectives represented. Another interesting example right now on the disarmament work, one of the campaigns that I'm involved in is the campaign to stop killer robots, which is a terrifying thing that is happening, the development of fully autonomous weapons. But one of the interesting developments recently has been that the sections of WILP that are most interested in this work aren't actually from the countries where we're seeing this tech being developed, like the United States, with high-tech advanced militaries, but it's actually a lot of our African sections, and in countries where they know these weapons are going to be used without their government's consent, without their people's consent, by the higher tech armies of the world. And so we've had a great campaign going with WILP Cameroon, and now WILP Ghana and Burundi and other African sections and groups from WILP are getting involved in this campaign to stop killer robots. And so we're able to actually help facilitate their involvement at the UN to do advocacy with governments, but then we also learn about what's happening in their national contexts at home. So I think that's a really important question and the best aspect of our work, really.
I think media is very important in this sense because we need to make more advocacy and we need to communicate in a wider areas, because if we don't have media, most of the atrocities or war issues, like what she's saying, will never be heard by so many people. So I think media is very important in this peace building advocacy.
I'd say a huge challenge with media is how do you get media to portray the full story, to like be giving the perspective that you and Ayoung and Ray have shared with us here tonight. Do you think that it needs to be traditional media, or does anyone want to jump in?
I mentioned earlier that we need international coalition and solidarity, because in my country or in most of the African countries, I'll talk about Africa, it's like communication or information, our media is controlled by the government. So every information that goes out have to be screened, and if any journalists have to break the rules, they either get killed or they got expelled from the country. So if we have international coalition and solidarity, the media outside will be very important also to communicate what is happening inside, because there's always the space is very shrinking within the country of conflict. So it becomes very difficult to communicate or to explain or to tell the world what is happening. So if we have the coalitions and also solidarity from the outside peace buildings group will definitely be able to communicate what's happening. Yeah.
I totally agree. Media is so important. They can actually help and hurt us. So developing good relations with the media is a skill that many organizations struggle to fine tune. We do a lot of media, meaning the coalition. We don't really have a term, but we are a coalition. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
Korea
coalition.
Peace Now is what it's called.
Korea Peace Now, not later. Now. We want to start with that agreement of peace. So our group has been quite vocal and visible with a number of op-eds and interviews on Democracy Now! and Joy Reid show, and I can't name all of them, Samantha Bee even. And we are quite visible. But I actually am a fan of groupings like this, and we are going to be doing many more teach-ins or whatever we call it, and I think that when you get to meet somebody who's doing something that you're interested in, and you have a chance to ask the person a burning question, or just know who it is and what kind of person is doing this, I think the person-to-person approach is so essential. And that's why the fact that we were able to go to North Korea and come back with our own understanding of what people there are like and what they're not like. All the myths about what they are, they can do this, they won't do this. Some of it was true in the sense that we were restricted in the places where we could go. So there were certainly guides that accompanies us everywhere. But basically we went to many places, had lots of conversations. And I really love the opportunity to talk to people and to ask people questions. And for this, I want to say thank you, which I forgot to say at the beginning. Sally Jones is another one of our partners Peace Action, which is the host for tonight. Peace Action, New York State, and Women Cross the DMZ, and some other like-minded or supportive groups have come together to really focus on the elected officials to D.C., Washington, in Congress, and we see our work to be one by one, step by step, changing the minds of the people who are in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. Because we have a president who calls a lot of the shots, but we are very hopeful that our voices can be heard and can filter back up in a much slightly different way by working with our elected officials. So Sally and I have partnered. We've walked the halls. We've done lobbying. We've walked, and I really love the partnerships that come about when people can get together.
I'll just add quickly that I think we're seeing now new resources become available, tools for media. I think, there's no more excuse for media to say, oh, we couldn't find a female expert. Oh, we couldn't find a person of color to be on this panel. Oh, we couldn't find whatever it is. They just weren't out there because there are now so many tools. So I just wanted to mention that Nobel Women's Initiative, one of our partners, has started this online resource now called Interview Her. And so if you need a woman expert on anything, then you can go on anything related to peace security issues, and you can go find a woman. But we need more of those resources also for not just women, but for queer folks, for people of color. There's a new grouping called Women of Color in Women, Peace and Security, and so trying to get out of this dynamic of just having white women being on panels all of the time, which I think is really important too, especially in the UN context. And there it's been such a battle to just break through the sort of straight white man on all panels, being quoted in all mainstream news articles. And so we need to keep being, I think, quite belligerent that this is essential, that the diversity of perspectives and voices and identities is absolutely essential to creating true peace and security in the world.
Susie, we call you Susie?
Yeah.
Susie is working a lot on violence against women and those kinds of issues. And violence against women, we share that concern and passion, focus for me. But also you, Emily, mentioned that you are working on the 1325. Yeah. So she'll talk a little more about that. But just to go back to Women Cross the DMZ, why did we cross the DMZ? What was our purpose in doing that? One that I did mention, the first one, which is to call attention to the fact that the Korean War must end. It just must end. It is keeping 3 generations of families divided. Many people have died just waiting to see someone who is either was a son, is a daughter, sister, brother, families divided for 3 generations. Those opportunities will never happen. They're gone. So this is bring an end to the war, help divided families no longer be separated, let them reunite, and let the women lead the way to peace. So women's leadership is a very, very strong component of the work we're doing, and I'm just going to ask you to talk about 1325.
Thank you so much. In 2000, a group of women decided to say we need a resolution by the Security Councils, and Cora Wise was among the women who dropped the 1325, the Security Council resolution. It was passed anonymously. That was very surprising, but then they saw the substance, the Security Council saw the substance and the importance of that document. Simply because when war broke out, the most affected are women. And I would like to highlight this point because many people ask, why are women saying every time they don't go to war, they don't hold guns, they don't die? But then women lost their husbands. They remain head of families. They have to struggle bringing up children in a devastated environment of conflict. They have to bring food to table because their husbands are killed or they are fighting. Their sons are killed. Their daughters are raped. They are also raped. So when you look at this dynamic, it is all around women. And there's no any woman who will be happy to lose her husband or to lose her son or to be raped or her daughter to be raped or killed. So this is a very simple component of why women are the target victims of every conflict. So the 1325 highlight 3 things. There's a protection preventions and, sorry, what is the other one? So in protection, and women participation in peace building. We have seen a lot of peace process has been going on, but the percentage of women who sit to negotiate or mediate is very, the space is very shrinking. There are no women. And when men who started the war sit, they always talk about their positions. Who will take which share of cake and who will be given what? It's not about what the citizens are going through or how do they have to do reparation, reconciliation, and bring justice and all this. So the 1325 highlight that it protects women from being sexually abused, like rapes, exploitation, all those sort of conflict that actually women go through them. It also talks about women inclusivity in the peace process and also in the peace building. Having a very key position, a key decision-making position. It's not just being in the government or any other leadership, but women must hold a very key decision-making positions. So in this document, the Security Councils have passed it, it's adopted, and the world has to use it. It has no excuse. But then, each country have to develop a national action plan to implement the 1325. And that national action plan has to ensure that women have to be part of the entire process, whether being reconstructions, being reparation, being justice, being in the leadership, or being protected in the next, in case. It has also been realized by the United Nations that a peace where women participate is a little bit sustainable compared to peace where women are not participating. So sustainability of peace also is another component of that. And GNWP is really they are known for the localization program. And in the localization program, we engage with women. We engage with women from the communities. We don't engage, the GNWP don't engage with the national women only, but they also take the peace to the grassroots, because the local women or the local communities have to benefit from the peace. The peace that comes to each country should not only end at the national level, where the cake is being shared, who has to take what, and who is taking which positions, but rather should be also felt by the local people, the local population, and the local communities. There is also 2250, that is youth and security. The resolution 2250 also highlight the importance of young people. If you see in most countries, people who hold guns are youth, because the decision of conflict is made at the table by the old men, but then it's executed by the young people. But how do we change the mentality? How do we tell the young people to cease from conflict? In Africa context, we are poor countries. That's a reality. Although we have a lot of resource, we are very rich in resource, but in reality, we don't enjoy our resource. So many young people are idle. They don't have opportunities. They don't even have better education to understand what peace means. And an idle man is what? An idle mind is what? It's a workshop of devil. So when conflict come in, the first people to take up arms are the youth. So how do we influence the young people, the youth, to make sure they abstain from war and also to embrace peace. And if peace comes, how do we ensure the young people become part of the peace implementation and the peace process? In my country, there's a position created by the agreement that a Ministry of Youth and Sport has to be given to a young man. But I learned recently that people are lobby already. People who are not even, people at their 40s and 50s, they are lobby to take this position because they have the context that they know how to rule better than the young one. So how do we ensure that the government respect that also? So that's a little briefing I could do about that. Yeah, thank you.
There's one other thing I wanted us to maybe discuss as a group before we open it up to the whole floor, and that's the rise of the Me Too movement. How has that affected your work? In what ways do you think that we are in a society that is maybe slowly but surely improving when it comes to including women and diverse voices on panels, and people of different identities, and not just cis women, but also trans women and non-binary folks? Do you think that we're getting to a place where that's happening? Are we backsliding with a president of the United States who so brazenly and without abandon talks about women the way he does? What are your thoughts on these things, and how has it, if it has, affected your work?
Two related things. One is the Me Too movement and its impact, and then also if that's helped with diversity too, because I see those as two different things. For both, I would say that as with any kind of activism or political engagement or social justice movement, there's always action, reaction, and it can feel sometimes like there's so much, like you mentioned, backsliding or this reaction of, the ultra misogyny that we can now see from the president of this country, and how that emboldens misogynists in countries around the world. So there is absolutely that powerful negative force that is brought down whenever we're seeing a shift. And we could see this in the women's rights movements before this, the civil rights movements in this country, that whenever we make a little bit of a gain, we're cracked down upon. And so this is, I would definitely not say that we're backsliding. I do think that force exists and is something that we have to reckon with, but we are shifting forward all the time. I've been very excited about what's come out from the Me Too movement and the spaces that's created. It is certainly not something at all that has solved the problem of sexual violence or the problem of misogyny or chauvinism or anything else, but it has created spaces and a legitimacy to the voices that are raising their own experiences or their understandings of the cultural normative oppressions that have created the situation that we're living in, where violence against women or violence against queer folks or violence against anybody who is gendered in an othered way is oppressed by the normative, the heteropatriarchy, if you will. And so I think that we're absolutely seeing a change, a positive change, and it's up to us as activists to make sure that we're always cracking open more of those spaces and that we're keeping that going in as much a forward direction as we can. But it's really palpable, I would say, like even within left-wing progressive coalitions that I've been a part of, a couple of years ago, for a woman to bring forward or a queer person to bring forward an instance of assault, it was not treated the same even within those left-wing movements. Whereas now, there's, I think, a much more compassionate and appropriate, I would say, response, which is to more automatically not dismiss the claim. And so this is something that I think for feminist activists is bread and butter. We know how to respond to these situations, but in general, in left movements, I haven't seen that. And now I see that changing. Now I see organizations and coalitions adopting policies, doing trainings, trying to address these issues. And I think that's a really good thing, and that'll keep us going in the right direction too. But yeah, I see it as overwhelmingly positive. I'm really enthusiastic about the shifts that we've seen and the solidarity that we've seen too. And globally as well, like it's been huge in South Korea too, right? I mean,
Yes.
and all over the world, that this sense that we can now speak where we were never allowed to speak before. And like I said, it hasn't solved anything. I mean, of course, it's still, everything is still tilted towards us in the legal system and talking to law enforcement and being taken seriously, but it is different than what it was. And that gets to the second part, I think, too, which is it not only opens space to talk about sexual assault, but it does help with having different perspectives, non-binary, queer voices on things. So I'm happy about it, but we have a lot of work to do, and it's up to us to keep making it happen.
I think that was very well said. I think opening up spaces is one way to see it or feel it or explain it, and I just feel that it's moved the needle, quite a few notches in the right direction. You mentioned South Korea. I'm learning that the Me Too movement has taken hold very strongly in South Korea, and a number of heretofore sheltered bad guys have been brought to light, and either they are heads of corporations or in whatever sector, the cases are coming to the fore. And this is really a big step for a country like South Korea, although it looked like a very modern country, and we have lots of, high tech and shining buildings, and, everything is ultra to the moment. There is a traditional sense of where the women belong and where the men belong, and the Confucian cut of a hierarchical society. That's still very prevalent. So to see the Me Too movement take hold, it does give women a different space, for lack of a better. That is really a good word. Yeah, and that gives us more of an opportunity to find leadership, where in the past, women were more or less not considered able to be leaders in the same way that men were. And I think it's making a very big difference in this country where I can see more, but I'm hearing that it's happening around the world.
Thank you. Yeah. The Me Too movement is it's not yet it's existing. Yeah, my country we are still struggling with that. So, but then we don't have space because our cultures are still very strong on women, and people still believe that issues of sexual violence are not supposed to be communicated by a woman publicly. So we still have that. We are actually at the advocacy level to ensure we unlock their mind and understanding of what it means to speak out about your right. In the recent days, the issues of child marriage has become very, very rampant in my country. And some of you might have seen in October last year, there was a very big news in CNN of a young girl from South Sudan being auctioned on Facebook. I think some of you might have seen that. And a number of girls are always subjected to this sexual exploitation by either their families or other people who thought they could do that because they feel like they will not be able to speak up. So issues of sexual violence are still very high in my country, and we are trying to make sure we continue to create awareness among the communities so that women are able to speak up, because they still believe in cultures where women are not supposed to speak certain things like sexual violence. You don't need to speak about it. Girls are still being given to their rapists because that's the community belief, that when you are raped and you speak out, or people happen to know that, you are useless, you will not be married, so you have to end up with your rapist. So the Me Too movement is doing great in the world, and also I can say the little we know about it, as the only few South Sudanese young women who are a little bit informed of what it is, we are battling with so many things. We are trying to get through the conservative society, through our cultures, and it's really, really hard, and we don't have laws that are actually assigned or adapted in my country to punish things like sexual violence. We don't have them up to now. So we're using international laws, we are using 1325, ending child marriage, but still, communities are still believing in their cultures, because our constitution also highlight that recognize the cultures of the people, which is a big challenge. So up to now, there is a constitutional review going on, and that constitutional review we need to change, at least that's to honestly, our cultures are good, yes, we don't say they are not good, but there are certain things that we don't need to condone because they don't respect people's right, individual right or women's right. So as it is existing here, it might help us soon, and it's a struggle anyway. Thank you.
I'm Sylvia Rodriguez, and I'm a member of Peace Action Manhattan, and we are 16 chapters or affiliates throughout the New York State area. The other very exciting thing is that we have 21 college or university chapters now, and that's under the direction of Emily Rubino. It's grown dramatically. So we have a lot of chapters, student chapters throughout the state, including here in the New York area. We have Columbia, Fordham, Manhattan College, Marymount, Macaulay Honors, CUNY, Hofstra, Pace, and Stony Brook. And the upcoming couple of years, we're going to have some very big challenges, and we really we're hoping that you would consider renewing membership or joining membership, because we have a lot of work to be done. I think Ayung, you talked about all the work that's being done with the legislature, and that's very exciting, because in a couple of weeks we're going to be down in Washington with the National Organizers Meeting, and actually meeting with our Senator Schumer and Gillibrand and our representatives across the state. So anyway, we're asking that you that you join us in the work we have to do. We really need your support, your actions, and if you go to our website, the Peace Action New York State website, you'll see the actions that you can participate in to change what's going on in our country for the next few years, which we really need to do.
Peace Action Manhattan has existed way before I was born. It will hopefully continue to exist way after I am gone. But we do have a great network of folks, and we're trying to reinvigorate the Peace Action Manhattan base to also include younger folks, whether they be in college or recent grads or people who are just young and in New York and care about these things, to form a community. But to return to the panelists that are awesome and here with us today, I am now, while everyone is shuffling around, going to open it up to audience questions.
I have a question for Susie right now. Susie, you mentioned 1325 and national action plans, and then kind of the work that your network is doing, your organization, to kind of work more on the local level. And at the last CSW, Commissions for the Status of Women meeting that I attended, they talked about the importance of local action plans. And so, is that effective in your country? Is that happening? Is there a trickle down of local action plans to help women become really key players, as you said, in the peacemaking process on the local level? Just curious how that's panning out. And if USIP, United States Institute of Peace, I don't know how instrumental they've been. I mean, I know you say that the laws are not really effective in terms of protecting women against sexual violence and rape. It's not publicly to be discussed, and that you're relying more on international law. And I'm wondering, how effective has that been? How supportive has international law been in your country?
The Global Network of Women Peace Builders is actually known for the localization program, like bridging the voice of the local women or the local population with the global policymakers. And that's why I'm here in New York, because I'm one of the local women from the communities. So I can communicate what my other fellow women are going through. So that's another way of bridging and creating a space. But then they are very effective in supporting the development of NAP, which is National Action Plan. My country have it already. I think we will, it's ending this year. No, it's ending 2020. So I think we will have a second NAP. But then the challenge is we do not have time to implement the National Action Plan because after the independence, 2 years later, war broke out. That was actually the time we were starting to develop the National Action Plan. So it has never been implemented. So even when we start the second NAP, maybe, it's going to be the same NAP we need to revise because there's nothing done. So we have the law, we have the NAPs. But then the USIP is actually engaging with the youth, especially. 2 weeks ago, they brought young people from South Sudan. They were in Washington with them, they have a meeting. But their context is that they want to engage young people, youth, young women and young men in peace buildings, and also to be part of the peace process, like to teach peace and to unlock the mind. Like I mentioned earlier that our conflict in South Sudan and other African countries, it goes through communities. So when leaders disagree, we as communities become part of the conflict. So community X will attack community Z, and community Z will attack community X. And this is the entire thing. That's the intersection of the conflict. So these young people across communities are actually being tried to be used or to be made as the peace builders within the communities, their communities. And then, yeah, we have laws, but we don't have sexual violence law that highlight the issues of sexual violence. But so that's how we use the international, like the 1325, the CEDAW, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So we use such provisions. But we also, in the Constitution, it highlights that sexual violence is a crime. We also have penal codes. We have the penal code, and then we have I don't know, sorry. So basically, we have those other legislation, but we don't have independent legislation that highlight, that specifically address sexual violence. But there are so many UN agencies, like recently when I was in New York, because I followed the home development so quick. So UNDP has established a sexual violence court, which is a very great success, and I'm so happy. So the sexual gender-based violence or the sexual violence court is going to try those perpetrators who are involved in sexual exploitation, sexual abuse, and rapes and all this. But then also, we will not be able to know who are the perpetrators if the victims don't speak up, because there's no one who will be going to, if I am raped and I don't tell you here, no one will know that. So there is a need to create more awareness, unlock the mind of the communities. And the UN recently have what they call the male championship on sexual violence. Men has to talk about sexual violence. They need to join the campaign so that women also their mind need to be unlocked, and other men who are part of because sexual violence is not only on women, even young boys are being raped, even some men are being raped by people in military. So I think the environment is a little bit changing now in my country. There is a report, although there are some kind of sexual violence still going on in different parts of the country, but the rate is reducing because so many men, for the first time this year, 4 women confessed. And actually they point out the perpetrators, which is a big achievement. And everyone was shocked, and the UN is trying also to support, so that women are able to speak up. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask all of you what you guys do to make women in countries or in environments where they don't feel safe coming out, what you do to help them feel safe and to protect their information so that they don't have any retaliation against them when they come and when they tell their stories.
First of all, I don't have any first-hand source of information, and if you've read something in the newspaper, in the mass media, I don't really know how accurate that would be either. So I don't think I want to go there. There's just not enough information, data, evidence. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Did you want to say anything?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go for it.
So, in terms of sexual violence, we have a principle we call the principle of confidentiality. And that's why anyone who come up with either being raped or being sexually exploited or abused, that information has to remain confident until the victims need the information to be public. Of course, there are retaliation from not only from the government, but also from the perpetrators and even from the families, because they know very well if perpetrators are put in prison, are being, pointed out, they will retaliate to the families of the victim. That's a double suffering, The families become also very vulnerable, and they're also the families of the victims. So we have the principle of confidentiality, and this is what actually guide our work. So like most of the young women who come up with issues of violence against them, in my country, they don't stay in the country. As I'm talking to you now, one of the young women who was a young girl actually, who was forced into marriage last 2 months ago, she has to leave the country and she has to get out illegally because she was actually wanted and the government was involved. It's a little bit complicated. So it is really difficult also to make information public unless there is a political will.
I do want to say something about what has been going on in South Korea, and it's specifically around, well, first of all, I'm not sure if everybody knows, but there are 28,500 U.S. Forces in South Korea. That's not just soldiers, but the support services surrounding the military needs. And there used to be some 30 different camps all around South Korea where these 28,500 people were scattered. But over the past year, they all did manage to come together in a very large area, maybe 45 miles southwest of Seoul, our capital city, in a huge, huge camp called Camp Humphreys. So the majority of the U.S. troops and U.S. personnel in South Korea connected to the military are now in Camp Humphreys. And I heard that the population of Camp Humphreys is 48,000 people. That's the size of the small college town I went to. It's a whole town. They have their own schools, they have their, all these service areas, whatever they need is all within Camp Humphreys. Now, that doesn't mean that some of the smaller camps around South Korea have been, evacuated or closed down. They still exist to some extent, and in the many years that they have been in South Korea, as you can imagine, an industry would sprout around each camp. And mostly for the entertainment of the people, and they're called camptowns, and dance places, massage places, restaurants, bars, music halls, just for the entertainment. And there have been many instances of abuse. Not always rape, but including rape and all forms of abuse against women. And there is a movement of South Korean women that has been focusing on this phenomenon, this crime. And several years ago, there was a very severe case which was brought to the courts in South Korea. And I just learned that this past year, it was resolved in favor of the plaintiffs. So that type of violence against women is one of the things that I'm very passionate about. And where I am sitting here in New York, I have been a very active part of a domestic violence counseling service here. It's out in Queens. And we have expanded from domestic violence, which is normally associated with violence in the home, and now we embrace people who have been hurt by any type of intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and as well as women who have been trafficked into prostitution. And so there is a shift happening here in the United States. The thing that we need to do is educate people and educate lawmakers to create policies that will change the culture where abuse is tolerated. And it's another story. So I work very closely with something called International Coalition Against Trafficking in Women. Our focus is to change the laws of the country. So here in New York now, in the past, a woman who was prostituted, if she's found in the street, would be arrested. The John would be free to go. The pimp is never to be found, and the woman is hauled into jail, and she pays the penalty. Now it has changed. New York State law is a little different. The focus for the arrest is on the John, and attempts are made to chase the pimp, and the arrested woman comes into court and has a choice of deciding whether she wants to serve it, and of course then she'll be going back to the street, or to go into change her path. So there's a rehabilitation and counseling and support services. And my organization, the Korean American Family Service Center, has been very active in helping put that together. In court now there are representatives from various cultural, meaning culturally sensitive, meaning there are Asians of all stripes. So there are Filipino advocates, there are Cambodian, Indian, the Asian community is what I know best, but Latino, everyone in the street now has a chance to opt for one or the other.
I don't have too much to add. Just to sort of get back, I think, to your original question, we try and have security policies in place. WILP has developed some of these in recent years. I think they sound similar to what you are using too in terms of principles, and learning from human rights defenders in local contexts about best practices in challenging situations. And since a lot of our global work is really online communications, like you were saying earlier, we're also trying to develop better online practices, so using tools like Signal or Proton Mail that have encryption, and we have an encryption specialist working with us on the Korea Peace Now project. So we're always trying to enhance that element of our work. But yeah, it's an ongoing struggle. I have heard, for those that are interested, I don't remember off the top of my head what the group's name is, but there's apparently a feminist tech group that organizes, they're called crypto parties, and they teach people how to encrypt, but they do it from a feminist perspective for women's groups, queer rights groups. So that could be something cool if you are looking into that for student networks or other things, to look into those types of organizations that are providing those services.
Hey, Young, you mentioned the peace treaty. Is that going to lead to reunification? Is that what your vision is?
Of course, we do have a grand vision of a peaceful world, a bigger, larger vision, but our nearer term vision is to just have peace. Let's just reconcile. Let's open borders. Let's communicate. Let's dialogue. Let's exchange. Let's let, in our case, let's let two Koreas just be able to reunite in spirit. Where reunification comes in, it is the dream of some people. Some of the maybe the older people in South Korea and perhaps in North Korea. But that's a very different thing to deal with, and it may happen, but it has more structural and governmental steps that need to be taken. And we're just really wanting to open the borders. That's our priority. That is gonna take enough years, you know. And where we will be after we are able to communicate, travel, visit each other, back and forth, do things that we used to do, 70 years ago. And unfortunately, Korean history is just fraught with a different kind of lack of peace. Not always active fighting, but, Korea was occupied for so long by Japan. It was encroached upon from the late 1800s, and then 1910 officially annexed by Japan. When it was freed from Japanese occupation in 1945, when Japan lost World War II, there was just a little bit of time, and then we were divided. And so it's been a constant struggle. The Korean people just want to be able to be together.
I really appreciate Peace Action's involvement in Korea Peace issue. I am one of the founding members of Korea Peace Network, which we have done the lab work, and this is our 4th year. So since last year, when Peace Action joined, Women Cross DMZ and Korea Peace Network, this effort got bigger and at national level. So I really appreciate Peace Action's involvement. And what I suggest is that last year 2018, was 50th year anniversary of the brilliant chapter in U.S. history, the fierce war, Vietnamese War movement, 1968. It was a huge climax of peace movement there. So I was expecting last year some kind of connection between this anti-war movement with the new surge of new drive for peace movement to rekindle the spirit of 1968. And here now we are 2019, which is like a critical juncture of not only U.S. history, not only Korean history, it's a human history. Whether we can move on the 20th century, with the massive destruction, massacre, human exploitation, whatever, to 21st century, which we can really enjoy and endeavor the human rights and really true light. It really depends on the U.S. citizen whether we can move on this war-driven economy to peace-driving economy. It's really important. So work with us to solve the Korean issue. The Korea Peace Treaty will be the turning point in 21st century. I myself has a kind of set goal of year 2025, which is like 6 years from now. Yeah, Women Cross DMZ has a set goal of 2020. We'll enter peace treaty, and 5 years from later on, my goal is to see reunited Korea for world peace. So work with us. Thank you.
As we've seen, definitely with all of the experiences you've all shared, when we think about violence in general, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to think of the ways which the position of women is at a disadvantage. And so I was wondering if you could speak from your own experiences how the position of, being a woman or occupying that position has been an advantage to your work, how it's informed, the perspectives that you may have brought, just the ways that it's empowered your work as opposed to, like I said, it's very easy to imagine the ways that it's hard to be a woman in the spaces you're working in. So I just wonder if you could talk about the ways that it's made it easier or better or stronger even.
I don't know if I have understood your question, but what I will say is I will talk on my perspective as a South Sudanese young woman and probably being among the first young women who are emerging and breaking the norms of our traditions, and being experiencing the first government system ever in the history of a new country. So it's not an easy space. First of all, it has a lot of wedges, and our late revolutionary called Dr. John Graham, who fought for the independence of our country today, said in his last speech when he signed the CPA, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement with the Khartoum, and he says South Sudanese women are the marginalized of the marginalized, because the South Sudanese people were the marginalized, and then women were marginalized by the same marginalized. So you see that how thick it is. It's like breaking double shell. So to my personal experience, it's not easy because our cultures believe when you are a young girl, you have to grow up in a family, go and get into your puberty at the age of 13, 14, or 15, and then you have to get married, form another family. You go through the violence, and that's how we live as African women. That's the stereotype. So coming up as a young woman who goes to school, have experience, go to the US and other countries, is a little bit very weird because people look at you like you want to break the norms. You want to teach our children the Western culture. When you talk about the human rights, they say this is not, it's the Western culture, it's not our culture. So it's not an easy space. But then I always, when we talk about peace, the women of South Sudan for the first time in history has been very vocal in the peace process, because we all grew during the war, and then when we get our country, 2 years later, we are subjected to another war. So it's a little bit kind of like, it's our role. Everyone is taking upon herself as a personal responsibility to make sure that we don't subject another generation into the same situation we have gone through. I have this quote before. I know we don't have time later. I always say peace is not a commodity. It cannot be acquired or attained through trading license. Peace is a process and a commitment to bring to an end the human suffering in every country. It doesn't matter where the conflict, where peace is, it doesn't matter. Whether in Korea, we felt affected because they are human beings. Whether in the South, whether in the East, we all felt as human beings. Thank you.
When I think of my role, my role and what I'm able to take on, I am just awed by the history of all the women who came before me. And now I'm speaking as an American, I am learning every day about a new heroic woman who stood up 100 years ago, and then others who came after her and who came together. And so we are standing, we women leaders today, we women workers, activists today, are standing on the shoulders of so many other courageous women. Today we have the benefit of Me Too, we have the benefit of many other kind of open attitudes. But back then, imagine how much they had to suffer and how much they had to bear and be powerful enough to withstand it. So I feel very privileged, and also at the same time feel that my obligation is in life now is to be able to share what I have been able to benefit from. And having been a foreign student here gave me a certain perspective as a 20 in my 20s, then in my 30s as a mother, then in my 40s as a single mother, and living in New York City with so many different cultures and so many developments happening all around me. I just absorbed everything, and I feel that human suffering, to eliminate human suffering, that's just what you said, and it rang. That is, people ask, why women? What's so good about women? Are they better than men? And the answer is, we see things differently from the men, and our focus is more about the human suffering, the human element, families, preservation of communities. So we do have a perspective as a woman, and also it's very, very comforting and enriching to meet, for me, to meet younger sisters who are so much wiser than I am, having learned other things from their experiences and sharing with women. I'm not sure that men share That's one of the, it's a guess, but I think that women have an easier time sharing and just like letting down our hair, we have a lot to let down. Yeah.
I would definitely agree with everything that you just said, for sure. And it's one of the things that's been so interesting working in the Korea Peace Now campaign, because it's been a women-only space, really, for the organizing. And so it's just a different atmosphere than the other coalitions that I might work in on nuclear weapons or killer robots, which are broader spaces. And the culture of it is very different. And I do think sharing is a part of that. I think caring is a part of it, too. I was just thinking when you were speaking that, one of the things that I do find empowering about being in either women only or women in queer spaces is sort of an innate sense of caring. Are people eating? Are they getting enough to eat while we're going about and like doing our mad jobs all the time? Are our emotional lives intact? We ask each other about our lives, and I can think, in terms of the straight men that I organize with, that doesn't happen very much. I can think of like 3 men maybe that might have ever asked me in like more than a decade of this work how I am, or to like bring a snack when I'm really busy, which is something that women and queer folks are much more inclined to do. And it's not because of some innate thing. It's just that we're socialized to do it. And so I do think that is something that men could be socialized to do a lot better. And it's something that is very enriching, I find, in that space. I also think that solidarity with women and with queer folks that have a knowledge and an experience of like a shared structural oppression, but also personal experiences of violence or discrimination. I think that is something that I've found quite empowering by being in spaces or being a woman or queer organizer. I think that's been really important to my growth and development. And then I think also, you were mentioning history of the women that have done this work, and that is such a big thing. I think also the history and the development of feminist and queer politics and theory is something that I find really enriching as well. The sort of the mistakes that have been made throughout history and the importance of an intersectional approach and learning about that and sort of the different shifts and struggles that the feminist movement has had to go through to really come to grips with itself and to be something that is accessible and vital now to the work that we're all doing. So, and I think that, women, queer people, and other allies have really done that work and invested that time, and we're benefiting from that now, and we'll have to continue struggling with it as well to make it better all the time. But I find that very enriching, and thank you for the question, because everyone always asks, oh, how hard is it? Tell me about your oppressions. And no one ever asks, tell me about your joys. So it's an absolutely beautiful question to have. Thanks.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for this wonderful program. I really learned so much, and thank you so much for this wonderful program. I really appreciate all that you said. You're all fascinating, very intelligent, interesting women. But there's Ms. Choi. You said we're standing on the shoulders of heroic women. Right now, there's a heroic woman out there that we all know about, Ilhan Omar. She has had the courage to speak up and say things that are considered politically sensitive. She's been thrown under the bus. I really think that we all have to get out there and support this very courageous woman.
Thank you so much. It's so inspirational listening to all of you talk, so thank you. My question is about the current youth right now. So I go to New York City Public High School, and so we have a social activism organization right now, but are sort of curious of how you guys think we can really make an impact on the world, especially internationally.
So the question is how youth students can make a difference? Is that correct? Okay. Internationally, okay. The primary thing is showing up and saying something and being extremely loud about it. The best lesson I think that as a young organizer I learned is that no matter what you're doing or what you're saying, you're always going to have somebody telling you that you're being ridiculous, that you are naive, that you don't fully understand the situation, that this is not possible, this is the way things are. And so the best advice that I have to anybody who's just getting started in activism is to not listen to any of that. It's not correct, and that naysaying will always be there no matter what you do or what you're asking for. So you might as well learn to ignore it early. I think the other important thing that helps you ignore it is solidarity. Do things with your friends. Do things that with people that you like, because activism is hard. It's hard work. It's underpaid. It's not celebrated. I mean, every once in a while we win a Nobel Peace Prize. But like, okay, that's cool, but like how much work goes into making that happen, and how many people's equally significant work and sacrifices are never recognized. So, you know, you need to find your joy in your work with people that you care about and people that you can agree with. I mean, we all, in our jobs, we all have to talk to people all the time that disagree with us. But I think that, and there's all kinds of trainings for that, about how you debate someone, how you engage with a hostile interlocutor, how to do that in, you know, street protests and on the public forum. But I think the piece that's missing there is that you also need to surround yourselves with people that do agree with you, because you're not crazy, you're not wrong to want to change the way that things are. And so you need safe spaces to share and to learn and to grow while you're also taking on the world. So, but the main thing is just to know that, you know, there are people everywhere doing so many important things. And I've been learning so much from the ways in which students in this country have been organizing around gun violence. And, you know, they got some things right that campaigns that I've worked on with people who are much older than I am do not get right. So we are learning lessons from students organizing today. And, you know, we can see movements in other countries as well that have tools now to really be transnational solidarity networks in a way that we couldn't necessarily do a few decades ago. And so I think there's a lot of potential for international organizing. And I'm really thrilled with what we've seen recently. So power to you, and don't give up.
I loved hearing you say that, and I hope you really mean it, because, you know, it's hard to do anything by yourself. You know, you can try to start something, but you need someone to help you start something. But the best thing I would say is hook up with someone who's already doing something you really want to do, and go there and say, can I help? How can I help? There is always some way that a volunteer can help lessen their burden. You know, it may not be glamorous work that you might be asked to do, but you'll learn a lot. You know, whether you work as an intern or just as a volunteer. I mean, the volunteers of the world are the saviors of the world. I mean, we cannot work without volunteers. So, do you live in Manhattan? Yeah. Do you live in this area? Okay, let's meet for coffee if you want to know more about, not just about Korea Peace, but, you know, other places and other organizations that are, there are so many issues right here in this world, in this country, but elsewhere in the international arena as well. And just as this lady was saying, you know, there needs to be a support base around people who speak up. And if you want to join that, you know where to find her. If you want to do something for, you know, some other, in South Sudan, speak with her. Find out, you know, so don't leave without making contact with us.
Thank you so much. I just want to add that you have started very well, but I need you to know that there are children of your age in other countries, like my own countries, who don't have opportunities to to the same opportunity you have. So when you become a human rights defender, you become an activist, it's not because we are achieving it so soon, but it is because it's the right thing to do. It's not because it's something we are achieving next year or the other year. It's a process because there are so many other activists who have come a long way. So get connected to people and support other children, inspire them. You have already inspired me because at your age, when I was at your age, I didn't have this opportunity. So.
Yes, so I'm Emily Rubino. I'm the Director of Policy and Outreach at Peace Action New York State. You can talk to me right now. You can also email me. It's emily.rubino@panis, PANYS.org. We have a growing student program that is awesome. I also was involved in activism as a student, mainly in college. So it's awesome that you are in high school and getting like super passionate and interested in these things. I think a lot of what Nuan just said is true. Like, a lot of people don't have the opportunity to start this young or have the resources to. And it's also like possibly not a fight, definitely not a fight that we're gonna win in our lifetimes. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try, and it doesn't mean that there's not moments of joy along the way that are worth celebrating. I feel like there's sometimes this idea that activism is something people grow out of, or it's like a phase that people have, like a rebellious phase or something. But I think you can look around this room and see that it is a lifelong passion for many. And that doesn't mean that it's your full-time job either, right? Like, many people don't get to work full-time on the causes that they are most passionate about, and also like different skills are needed in the movement. It's not just people who, like, I get to work with students every day, but other people are helping out with their own skills and bringing them to the movement. So I think there's also a place for everyone. And like, I have college students that I work with that are not at all involved in international political affairs as their major. Like, we have people in STEM who are in our college programs, and people who are, you know, like English majors who are in our programs, and that doesn't mean that they're less passionate or that they know less. It's just that they have a different knowledge and skill set. So yeah, link up with people, find joy in your work, find time to sleep and take care of yourself too. And I think this is a great note to end on, is like forward looking to the future. So thanks everyone again for coming. And
has a burning question.
This weekend I was up in Corning, New York at a retreat for prison reform work, and there were 16 of us, and 14 were women. I just want to say that. So we're hard at work.
Huge round of applause for our